Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Adriana Shukla, and I'm with Snowplow. I'll be joined here today with Miles Younger and John Boris. So what we'll be talking about today is zero-party data and unstructured data. I know that we'll be talking through and defining some of these keywords for me, especially for somebody like me. I want to be, have it defined, and then we'll talk through some real life use cases and examples. So I'm really excited to have them. Some housekeeping. Feel free to comment on the chat. We're happy to answer questions live. We look forward to an engaging conversation, and tell us where you guys are all from. Tell us from where you are and where you're listening in from. So I'll hand it over to John and Miles to introduce themselves and get this talk going.
Hey, everybody. Thank you very much, Adriana. I'll just introduce myself quick, and then John, you can intro yourself, and we can explain what it is we're doing here today. I'm Miles Younger, head of innovation and insights at UF Digital. We are the leading training partner in the ad tech martech space. Check us out at uof.digital. And I am head of innovation and insights there, which is essentially kind of split between head of content and head of product development. And I am in Portland, Oregon. If anybody on the live stream is in Portland, drop a comment. There's actually the last webinar that I did. Somebody was in Portland, and we've managed to connect on LinkedIn later. Anyway, John, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Miles. John Boris. I'm on the Snowplow team, specifically overseeing partner marketing here at Snowplow. For those of you not familiar with Snowplow, we are a customer data infrastructure that's helping brands collect behavioral event data, both unstructured and structured, which we'll be chatting about today, to help power and deliver personalized experiences, power AI use cases, power analytics. So been with the company for about a year, really excited to be joined by Miles today and bring this story to life. I'm based on the East Coast, so over up in Connecticut, about an hour north of New York City. So for the folks in the New York area, if you want to share that you're there, want to meet up in the near future, happy to do so. So yeah, excited to be chatting with you today, Miles.
Yes, likewise. And thank you both very much for setting this up. This will be a lot of fun. So I can kind of explain and give some context and background here. So John wrote a blog post on the Source of Truth blog, which, John, if I'm not mistaken, is the Snowplow CEO Alex Dean's
Correct.
blog. Yeah, and he has like guest blogs. I know like Jonathan Mendez has blogged on there. I've read some of his stuff there. And so it's a blog that I subscribe to. And so I got this notification about John's post. It was called "The Power of Zero-Party Unstructured Data," which immediately caught my eye because I've been sort of thinking of writing something similar, and I've been thinking about the same thing. And so I'm like, oh, I got to read this. I got to like figure out what this guy has to say on the topic, because I don't see it being talked about all that much. And I certainly agree with you, John, that it is going to be a bigger and bigger deal over the next couple of years. And so I think I posted something to LinkedIn about it. And then, we ended up talking, and then we ended up setting this up. And so like, basically, I would love to just kind of talk through some of the ideas in that post, because it sounds, I don't know, academic or technical, talking about unstructured data, zero-party data, things like this.
Yeah.
But conceptually, I don't think it's not particularly complex, to be honest. I think the implications are big, but the core concepts aren't really that complex.
Yep.
And so anyway, I'm excited to write or talk to you about this. And thank you for writing it. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, especially given that I've had this in the back of my mind for, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months, God knows how long, to write something similar. Like what inspired you? Was there something that you saw? Was there something like that a Snowplow customer asked you or did, or like how did the post come about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if there was one individual factor that led to the piece. It might have been the breakfast that Alex Dean and I were having in New York, and we were just spitballing about really just trying to get that narrative out into the market and get a reaction, right, from folks to see, is this something that they're interested in? Are other folks thinking about this? Which is great to, see, Miles, you being so passionate about the topic, seeing some of the other comments, seeing someone from like Arpit from DataBeats who had written about it a few years ago. So I think that was, I guess, the immediate factor. But if I take a step back, I think there's just been two rampant themes in our space right now related to, right, the evolution of the customer experience, how data is impacting that I think it really inspired, bringing this to life. So I think in terms of the themes, as they relate to unstructured data, I think first and foremost, there's just a ton of advancement, right, that's happening right now, in terms of how enterprises can just go about storing massive amounts of data, right, and diverse data sets, and the computing that's needed to make sense of it, operationalize it for the business. And we could have like a whole discussion on data lakes, lake houses, all the buzz about Iceberg. Like there's a ton to unpack there in terms of like how enterprises can really take a page out of, say, right, Netflix, one of the most savvy data companies out there, and can start storing massive amounts of unstructured data, structured data alongside one another, and power all types of really, right, exciting analytics and operational use cases. And right now, right, we're seeing a lot of brands can actually mimic, right, the setup of Netflix or an Amazon, and really do that in a cost-effective manner, which is exciting. So I think that's one theme that I've been seeing is just, and talking to also Snowplow customers, just seeing, how they're operationalizing working with big data, is something that, led to this thinking. And I think second, the theme that kind of plays hand in hand with the first is just the proliferation of AI, right? Like I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about AI today. But I think there's an onus, especially on marketing teams, right, to bring AI stories to life, to put it in the context of, either the SaaS platform that you're working at or the e-commerce business that you're driving, to showcase how AI, specifically, I think generative AI, is playing alongside your core business. So when it comes to producing and working with, right, that said unstructured data, which is so much easier to collect and store now, I think it really blew my mind actually a few months ago to see how ChatGPT, and specifically, the multimodal AI that they were building, right, where you could actually take not only text, but things like images, voice, all these diverse data sets, these very unstructured data types, and actually produce feedbacks and conversations and very structured thinking to the end user. So I think Gen AI is really taking unstructured data and making it more legible, more structured, right, in essence. And with that, I think a lot of businesses are now adopting their ideologies and their roadmaps and their way of thinking about, now that this is changing kind of consumer behavior, how should we react to this and plug more Gen AI into our day-to-day operations experience? That's kind of the crux behind why we felt, let's get this piece out and see how people react.
It's funny that you should mention like cheap storage, cheap compute. Like there's like, yes, and I agree. There's a whole separate conversation that we could have about everything that has brought about. That it's so cheap now to store, something like unstructured data, like video, audio, images, things like that. It unlocks like so many new use cases. So before we get too much further, I want to make sure that we define for everybody watching the concepts that we're talking about. So, your post is unpacking kind of two data types that people might not be completely familiar with. First being unstructured data versus structured data. So like, what's the difference there? And then the second being a particular like sort of side passion of mine going back several years is zero party data, as opposed to, first, second, third party that people might have heard about. So do you want to walk everybody through kind of some basic definitions there and sort of explain a little bit of the significance of those differences?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Adrian, I also see you joined the fold. So
I'm honestly just here to listen in on the definitions and everything, and ask questions for people that may be in a role of mine that don't know. So
yeah, of course. So yeah, Miles, I think you set it up perfectly. I think they're unstructured and zero party. They're somewhat related, and we'll talk about how they are related. But I think there are two distinct right concepts there. So let me let's chat more about the distinction between zero and first party data. So I think when I think about zero versus first party data, it's more about where the data is coming from, right? So specifically from whom, right? Where's the source of that data? So
Yep.
there are two important stakeholders in a digital and even non-digital experience, right? One is the customer, the user, the consumer, and the other is the enterprise, right? The business, the seller of the goods, the services. And when we talk about zero-party data, it's really information that's shared explicitly by the end user with the business, right? So, and zero-party data has been around for quite some time, right? In the form of surveys, questionnaires,
Yep.
and websites have done a good job, right, in capturing these signals in things like preference centers in the onboarding experience. So I'm sure you've seen this, Miles and Adriana, when you get asked which brands do you prefer, right? When you download maybe a new e-commerce app, that's a form of zero-party data that you're explicitly sharing, right, with the business, with that app, in hopes of getting a better shopping experience in return. So that's zero-party data in a nutshell. First-party data, on the flip side of the coin, is information that's more implicitly captured by the business. So it's really their way to represent the customer, right? And hopefully, by building a sense of who that customer is through some implicit signals on the website, app, et cetera,
Yep.
they can inform decisions, right? Whether it be product decisions, A/B testing, marketing, et cetera. It's hopefully informing their workflows, right? So there are a ton of SaaS applications, some of which I've worked at, like Abraze and Amplitude, that do really great jobs in their own domains to help marketers or product managers make sense, right, of the customer journey. But in essence, right, they're allowing you to collect via like mobile SDKs, JavaScript tags to monitor, right, the activity, the behavior on a site or an app, things like clicking add to cart, the fact that you returned an item, right? The business can monitor that and infer things like, you know, maybe what you're potentially going to do next. But again, they're not necessarily derived from the customer, right? They're not explicitly shared. So while you can predict, you know, maybe this person should fall into this audience or should receive this kind of communication, again, those are implicit just signals that the business is gathering from their vantage point. So that's the main distinction. And
yeah, the way that I often, you know, you brought up like installing an e-com app and you know, maybe setting a few preferences like on install, like, you know, what are your favorite brands? Like it's a common distinction that I make when I'm trying to explain sort of zero party declared data versus first party sort of, you know, observation and data collection.
Yep.
Is, you know, you really could go about that two ways as the app owner. Is you could just ask somebody up front, what are your favorite brands?
Yep.
Or you could track them as they browse around your app and try to generate a model of what their favorite brands are. Or you can do both.
Yep.
But it's pretty easy to see the distinction there between like, well, you could try to predict their favorite brands, or you could just ask them. You know?
Exactly. I mean, think of it. Let's take like a non-digital example of me going into Nordstrom's, right? And like, let's say in this scenario, there's this fictitious little drone like monitoring me as I go through Nordstrom, right? Like, and it could be monitoring, oh, like he's going over to this rack and looking at these jeans and he's looking at this shirt. Maybe he likes, you know, Theory as a brand, right? Or he likes this type of clothing. You know, the business Nordstrom can infer, okay, like let's bucket him in as this type of consumer. And that's totally fine, right? To your point, Miles, like people do that in a digital sense, but there's also the case where I just open my mouth and interact with a store associate, right? And say, hey, I'm actually really looking for this type of new jacket. I'm into these brands. And that form of zero party data is a very different exchange, right? And both could get to the same outcomes and maybe giving me recommendations. We'll talk about that later, but those are two different ways to interact.
And some, you know, like when you're thinking about that zero party data, you can also look at it from a perspective of gathering information from like your customers and like support tickets and things like that to infer like who's your ICP, what are the problems that they're trying to solve for, what are the things that you can use that data to like inform your product enhancements or what you're going to do further in your product. So like when thinking from a marketing perspective, I like to use that zero party data from like tickets and things like that of what are people doing with our product that our ICP is really trying to solve for, and how are they solving that, so that I can, take gong calls for, there's companies that take gong calls, they take all that information and they gather that into that zero party data to like infer or make decisions based off of that. So,
Exactly.
another example of that.
Never hurts to listen to your customers.
Yeah, it applies to B2B too, right? Like we have tons of rich context in gong calls, right, with our customers versus monitoring what they do on our platform, right? They could be used hand in hand to make decisions. So
well, because otherwise I feel like there are gaps in some of the other data, that you don't really get unless you listen to this. You listen to this first party data. So there's always like gaps in the data that you can kind of fill in through or infer from this other, zero party data that you're gathering.
It's like, hey, how much do you want to be a mind reader or not?
Right.
So John, you also talked a lot about unstructured data.
Yes.
So let's talk a bit about the distinction between unstructured and structured data, and then just, at least in the context of your piece, the significance of unstructured data.
Yeah. So it's funny. I may even work on like a follow-up piece of this where like you could create this matrix, if you will, of, unstructured data. There can be first party unstructured data. There can be first party structured data, unstructured zero party data, unstructured, right? Like
I'm a huge fan of 2x2 matrices and frameworks. I love it.
So just want to get that out there again. There are distinct like kind of elements, if you will. So now that we've distinguished zero versus first party, structured and unstructured, I like to think of more about like the what in terms of the information that's being captured and how it's being captured. So structured data, like it's information that's readily organized. It's predefined. It has a schema, right? It fits within rows and columns, right, on a spreadsheet or relational database. It's easy to search. It's easy to sort. It's easy to analyze, right? And in the context of like customer data, right, customer purchase history, right, a table in which you maybe have a database that stores a customer's name, their order dates, their order amounts, products purchased, SKUs. Are they a loyalty member or not? Like that's very structured information, right? Unstructured data, it's information that doesn't have, right, a predefined format or organization. It includes a lot of different format types as well. So when we think about text, conversations and logs, images, audio, video, all that type of content is unstructured in nature, and it's more complex and challenging in terms of like analyzing, right, and operationalizing that data than structured data. So unstructured data, we mentioned a few examples, but customer support chat logs, right, Adriana? So you could look at text-based conversations between an agent, customer service agent, and a customer. They could surface things around complaints and feedback, which could be interesting. Social media posts, right? You could get a ton of imagery in there, videos about your brand. So that's the main distinction between the two. And again, you could capture unstructured data from the customer directly as a zero party means, or there's instances, right, where a first party could even capture it as well. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I mean, it's, I think, there's something to be said of the fact that even just storing and processing this unstructured data like is only a relatively recent phenomenon, because there's like the question to ask of like, well, why haven't companies been using unstructured data for the last 10, 20 years? Like there's always been plenty of unstructured data. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, in your opinion, sort of like, so your post is around AI as, an application for unstructured data. So if you collect it, there's this question of like, so what? Okay, well now we have a so what? We have AI applications that we can feed this data into.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you can talk also a little bit about collecting that data and why weren't companies necessarily collecting it for the last, like I said, 10 or 20 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it goes back to the two themes I mentioned earlier. I think there's the, the ability to mimic, what folks like Netflix had built, right, in the past, and some of the most like data savvy and mature companies that have huge resourcing teams, right, have huge dollars that they're able to kind of collect this information and make sense of it. And now I think there's advancements in terms of, I think specifically data lakes and lake houses, and those architectures are becoming more and more prevalent where, again, it's more cost effective to handle that data and store it, right? But even from that standpoint, you still need to make sense of the unstructured data signals, right? And like surface the intelligence out of that to operationalize it for, the product team, for the marketing team, et cetera. And that's where the AI kind of lens and facet comes into play. So what's really interesting, just in working with, again, as a partner marketer, I work with the Snowflakes of the world, Databricks, AWS. It's just really amazing now to see, not only are you able to store a lot of this unstructured data in a seamless manner, but they're actually now bringing the AI, the LLMs closer to that data with some of their features and their advancements. So you can now allow a business to more easily make sense of that unstructured data and draw insights from that in terms of things like sentiment, right, tone, because again, now you have this kind of comprehensive toolkit and data platform where you can now structure the unstructured, if that makes sense. And put it into things like customer tables, inventory tables, et cetera. And then all the downstream operations that you need to do off of that, whether it's marketing campaigns, product enhancements, et cetera, now has a richer signal, right, from that unstructured, foundation. So yeah, I think we're finally starting to see, again, it's not everyone out there that's taking advantage and thinking about this architecture, but some of the more, advanced and I would say more mature Snowplow customers are starting to kind of adopt this way of thinking. And I think it's really leading to a great competitive advantage for a lot of these brands.
It's an interesting thing to think about, sort of the chicken and egg question of like, is the use case driving the infrastructure or is the infrastructure driving the use case? And the answer is probably both, but it's definitely like an interesting dynamic. So actually, speaking of use cases, let's I think we've got some good definitions laid down. And so let's talk a little bit about use cases. And if you could give like a quick just hit list. You've spoken about this a little bit, but I think it would we do well to kind of like sharpen the distinction on where a company would collect structured first party data versus where they might collect unstructured zero party data. So like you mentioned, for instance, support chats as being like a potential source of zero party unstructured data. But can you offer up just a couple of more quick examples of what fits into each of those two buckets?
We mentioned the support ticket and like how that can impact customer experience and customer support operations. So that's been possible to do with a platform like Snowplow, right, where you're able to actually implement some of the tracking, on a website or a forum, have the APIs to ingest that information and then make sense of that unstructured data through the use of LLMs, et cetera. So, but I think some other interesting use cases that we've been seeing. One, actually, I literally was just looking at a case study this morning that's really exciting around user-generated content specifically. So, and user-generated content in the scope of a forum, essentially, right? So we have one gaming client in particular that's actually harnessing a lot of the unstructured kind of conversations that are happening in one of their player platforms. Has all different types of media being shared, right? Like videos, images, conversations. And they're trying to surface insights, right, around this kind of rich forum conversation into sentiment, right, about like certain in-game events, certain promotions that people might want to see. And that's actually informing some of their product marketing strategy, et cetera. So they can optimize, right, hopefully the personalization, the experience. So it's and what's really nice, right, they could capture that unstructured data in one forum and then also marry that with some of the first party data that they might be collecting in the game itself. And you could actually now see like, hey, the things that people are talking about maybe in a negative manner? Are we seeing that behavior kind of dip down in the game itself through the first party data signals? And that will determine the effectiveness, right, of what we did to intervene, or the opposite, right? They wanted to see more promotions. We actually did that in the in-game experience. Has that resulted, right, in an uplift in conversion? So it's a really, again, a really highly mature like way of thinking about using the two different types of data. But and it doesn't apply to every business or industry, but I think it's a really interesting way about going about decision making.
Yeah, well, the distinction that you kind of drew there for this gaming client is interesting because, and I'm speaking in like very broad generalities. I don't know anything about this client, but like the forums, they're collecting unstructured data essentially from like an organic environment that doesn't really I mean, it has the structure of a forum, but beyond that, a forum is a forum. You could do anything with it. You can have any conversation. You can upload media. You can do all sorts of things. Whereas the game itself, where they're able to collect structured first-party data, is a structured environment. Like it's a designed environment. Everything has been kind of designed for the user, and everything is like tightly controlled. And so it's just an interesting distinction to think about at a very high level, is like where customers are interacting with your brand in an organic way might tend more to unstructured data, whereas where customers are interacting in some highly structured, prescribed, or process driven or whatever way, there you're probably going to get stronger, say, structured first party data. So anyway, it's an interesting distinction.
It's a great way to like classify the two. And even like if I think about YouTube, product reviews or something of the sort, right? Someone buys a bicycle or a car, for instance, right, and like does a whole review on the new Jeep or something of the sort. Like that's a very in the wild kind of unstructured way about doing it, versus actually going about buying it on a CarMax or a more structured site, let's say.
Or maybe like another use case would be like blog post like comments on a blog, or like a chat bot, like if you have a chat bot on your website, or even people searching on your website for different things, like that search intake that you're getting, those are all types of, I guess, more common on like a lot of different websites that people could potentially utilize that data for insights too.
And I mean, I think this gets to like why, I agree with you, John, that there's going to be kind of a revolution around this stuff over the next couple of years, is because for the sort of entire history of, MarTech, let's say, or digital marketing, up until kind of now-ish, maybe a few years, prior, companies have been essentially blind to all of that stuff, unless you had an intern or something to go monitor it sort of manually and be active in those forums, or be active on all your social channels, and all these very, very labor intensive kind of unscientific ways to stay on top of what's really like being able to take the temperature in any of those kind of organic environments. Like companies have been essentially completely blind to it. And yet, like anybody who, all of us as like everyday consumers, if you really are loyal to a brand, or you have, a good interaction with a company or whatever, or a bad one, 99% of that happens like in an organic context. Like the company's gonna have a very hard time kind of collecting a sort of comprehensive view on why your interaction was good or bad, or why you were happy or sad, because they're blind to all the most meaningful things that you might have said or done, or that other people, things you might have reacted to, etc. So I think it just kind of exposes like why this is set up to be so revolutionary, because you've got just this entire swath of information that companies have been essentially blind to. So just either in the context of snowplow or not, can you talk about just like some other use cases that you're kind of seeing in market, or that you're thinking about, for the audience who's thinking about, okay, I understand what unstructured data is. I understand, what zero party data from the consumer is. What are some of the other ways that that this might be applied?
I think we're in this like Wild West period, right, where people are I think experimenting, playing around with these concepts. So there's some funky use cases. I even saw one the other day. It was one, I forget the name of the retailer. I probably shouldn't mention them on the call, but I think they were even letting you upload images of yourself like in the in-store experience, and then based on like, your body type,
Yep.
like actually recommending certain products, which is interesting. I could see it also going haywire a little bit based on how AI interprets, what you look like. But that's a really, interesting, just like in-store, that's kind of blending, right, the in-store and digital experience, which is fascinating. I think we're seeing a lot of discussions around, it's hard to not hear something mentioned around AI agents specifically.
Yep.
I think customer agents are going to become more and more prevalent. The amount of one, I think money being pumped into companies that are powering that tech is definitely rising. And I think two, consumers are just changing in how they. I think ChatGPT has changed, and Claude and all these different applications have changed the way we kind of interact with internet applications. So I think a lot of e-commerce, media, et cetera, companies are going to have to adapt as well. So with that, you'll see more ChatGPT like design patterns in a lot of those experiences. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know if you saw, but I happened to catch news that Salesforce acquired a company called Tenix.
I saw that.
Tenyx, which is an AI-powered like customer service agent. So along the lines of what you're describing.
Yeah, and I mean, like, think of the co-pilots for an engine from a software engineering perspective, right? That folks are. I think Google's changed on in terms of how they like spit out results. Right now, you're actually getting a ChatGPT like response rather than the link. So, so I think with that, and we've seen some of our more savvy like e-commerce companies, customers that we work with, play around with shopper agents, and they're actually, starting to collect with Snowplow these unstructured text conversations and conversation and building AI generated signals, things like sentiment scores, right, from the back and forth, and informing what they should actually do next, right? Like, should they actually maybe surface a discount code because this is going haywire and the person will not convert? Should they surface a different recommendation? And we released a feature, a data application back in the summer, AI agent analytics, that we power with Snowflake. And that's actually helping a lot of businesses make sense of like the effectiveness of these AI agents. So I think that's going to be another use case that we just see more and more in our day-to-day.
Yeah. I mean, speaking like from my own perspective as a whatever everyday consumer, I can already sort of see myself. My Google queries are getting less and less formal. They're getting more and more just these casual questions that I chuck over the wall because I know that Google will either give me like a just traditional search results, which is fine, or if it's kind of my query is vague enough, then Gemini will just generate an answer for me. And so either way, I get helped. But it's just sort of saves me a bit of like mental effort of having to formalize the search query, a la 10 or 20 years ago when you had to kind of be careful about what you put into the query box to make sure you got back something that was actually going to be useful to you.
Yep. You're talking to a guy who was in paid search for a bit.
Okay.
So I totally get it. Yeah.
Hey, John, I have a question for you. Like, what is the largest blocker you think for companies like starting to utilize this data? In general, we're seeing more and more. We talked about the chicken and the egg. What's causing it? What do you think the largest blocker is to people, having higher implementation rates of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, I think it's still this privacy aspect, right? Like, how do you establish kind of that connection with the end consumer to say like, hey, this is how you're right. Zero party data is explicit. It's very helpful to build a great product experience, but I think a lot of folks are trying to figure out like, what is that value exchange and like, how do we, maintain that connection with the end user, that what they're sharing is going to, again, give back a benefit to them in terms of a better personalized experience. So, and I think with that, folks are just, working with a lot of product managers and marketers over the years, when you put things out in the wild, it's especially something like AI, just like how is it going to impact the experience in potentially a really negative way, right? So I think folks are just really hesitant. Similar to like when we were working at Braze with like new like push notifications. I remember in-app messaging, like that was so new for a lot of folks that everyone was so apprehensive about actually like press send right on a campaign and like having something new out there, that a lot of folks are going to be apprehensive. So I think there's just a risk. There's inherent like risk assessment, right, with each organization. Some are going to be more risky, especially as you get in the enterprise, they'll be more risk adverse. So I think that's the biggest blocker right now.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's the whole notion of kind of letting go of the steering wheel a little bit, which is a really crazy thing with AI of like, because computers being what they are and what they have been for, I don't know, whatever, 75 years, you don't let go of the steering wheel. Like you are the steering wheel. There's no one else to steer the car. And now there's kind of are these solutions that can kind of steer the car a little bit. So my last question is this, kind of, throw whatever formality out the window, I just would be curious, like, as to like your personal perspective as somebody who's obviously thinking about this a lot, like just in your like personal life or potentially your professional life, like, are you thinking about any like experiences, either bad experiences you've had with brands or brands that you wish would, make more use of like unstructured zero party data where, whatever your experience would just be like, more delightful, easier, et cetera. I'm just curious, like from a personal perspective, like anything that you've seen out there in market where there's a company that's either doing a really good job of this now, or you wish that they would start employing this.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I actually liked your example in your LinkedIn post yesterday about the furniture. And
that was partial credit to Adriana, who I forget what it was that you said that it sort of partly inspired that.
I was shopping for a new couch for
that's
my
what it was.
I mean, you could insert furniture shopping. I think I mentioned like a Home Depot example where like I've got a project right in the backyard and I need to accomplish that. I mean, I think when we think about like recommendations on, a digital experience, like it could still be very way off base. And so again, you're inferring based off a few signals on the site.
Yeah.
Let's take Adriana's example. I started looking at some chairs. I look for items under $500. They're probably going to bucket me, right, that e-commerce company, into someone else that had purchased those types of things.
Yeah.
But it could be way off base in how it classifies me, right? Like I could have very different styles, preferences, the size of my room. Like I have a dog. Is it pet friendly? Like there's so many things I want to share with that e-commerce brand. Yeah. So I think in a world where a business, right, you said fast forward to 2026, where they could hear directly from me, whether it's through an AI agent, whether they're monitoring some forum or what have you. But what if I could show a video where, upload a video where I actually show my room, it gets a sense of my style. It's right. I'm adding some further context about my dog. And I'm giving more like multimodal type, right, zero party signals, a very diverse set of inputs that it can now just say, oh, wow, John is actually nowhere near where we thought he was. Let's recommend this category. That's such a cool shopping experience that I would love to see more and more brands adopt. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm also waiting for that to come along. I mean, what you said about, say, you search for a, couch or whatever at, say, a price point of, $500 or below, which seems very cheap for a couch. Maybe not at IKEA, but, even in that case, like, okay, so that's a very simplistic signal to have on, like, say, an e-com furniture site or something. So it's just going to then go look in its product index and start recommending products that are couch and under $500. It's like very, very simple rules-based thing. When like we all know that, like, if it's something like that's a very meaningful product, like that is going to sit in your living room. It's potentially like a statement piece. There's potentially a $550 couch that you would gladly buy or a $600 one, if only it would show it to you sort of in context of like, hey, can I show you this other one? It's just exactly the same way that a sales associate would work. Of like, let
Exactly.
me show you this thing. It's $100 more than what you said your budget was, but I think you're going to really like it. And you look at it and you're like, yeah, that is more than I wanted to spend, but yeah, now I have to buy it because you showed it to me and this is perfect, you know?
For
Yep.
me,
And
that's
so,
looking at like aesthetics. You know, I want it
Yeah.
to look a certain way, but also my daughter is going to destroy it. So what can you give me as the cheapest option that
Like-
looks aesthetically pleasing in my house that I
This
don't
is-
care that gets destroyed? So,
when my wife and I look at couches, it gets about like 30 seconds of looking at these nice couches. We're like, what are we even looking at this for? Like, our kids are just going to destroy it. Like maybe we could buy this in 10 years. But
but I mean, the same thing goes for clothes. Like I've seen
Yeah.
several people, where I'm like, I love that outfit, or I love that dress, or I love
Yep.
that look. I'd
Yep.
like to get something similar for myself. If I could upload like a photo or type in like I'm looking for this, that, describe the kind of like party that I'm going to or the event that I'm going to,
Yep.
and you can match that depending on whatever I'm putting in. That would be ideal, because then I don't have to spend. I mean, then I'd have to figure out what I'm doing with all my time because I wouldn't have to go through hundreds of outfits anymore.
I would love that. I mean, let's, again, not to get too far off base, but like, what if you in the morning just put in a bunch of prompts of what you wanted to do for that day, right? And like, let an agent do it, right? I need I need to book that flight. I need to book a reservation, and like it can go out on the internet and do that for you. Like that's that's an interesting future. So we're close to that, so.
Well, on a perhaps closing note, like this is sort of like why I was excited to read your post, is because I think what you wrote is one of those sort of like first dominoes that you tip over to eventually get to this future where, we probably will have these agents able to, perform meaningful tasks for us and like, make genuinely meaningful recommendations and things like that. So anyway, I think Adriana, it's probably time to wrap up. We're about 40 minutes in. I just wanted to say thank you. This was fun. Thank you for writing that, John. Thanks for indulging me and interviewing you about it.
Of course. It was great to sit down and just unpack it more with you, Miles. And I'm hoping the folks who attended today also learned something, and excited to write more about the topic in the future.
Yeah, we're really happy to have everybody, and thank you guys both. I learned a lot actually over the conversations over the past couple weeks, and it was really honestly nice to talk about some of the use cases of the future of what's coming out. So thank you once again. Thank you to everybody that viewed today. If you have any questions, feel free to engage with us on LinkedIn. And I hope everybody has a